Did you know that some prisons are so violent, isolated, and heavily guarded that surviving inside can feel harder than escaping? From mega prisons packed with gang members to frozen islands, underground cells, and facilities built for the world's most dangerous criminals, these places push punishment to terrifying extremes. But which prison is the most brutal of them all? Stay with us, because the final locations may change what prison means. One, CECOT, El Salvador. Hidden behind layers of checkpoints and armed security, CECOT does not feel like an ordinary prison. It feels more like a fortress built to remove some of the country's most feared gang members from society almost completely. Opened in 2023, the Terrorism Confinement Center was created after El Salvador launched a massive crackdown on gangs. Reaching the cell blocks means passing through multiple inspections, biometric systems, surveillance zones, and heavily controlled gates. Inside, huge concrete pavilions hold large groups of inmates under constant observation. Privacy is almost non-existent, movement is tightly restricted, and armed officers control nearly every transition between sections. But the most striking part is the scale. Thousands of prisoners can be held within a single high-security complex designed specifically for long-term containment. For outsiders, CECOT looks like a symbol of absolute control. For the men locked inside, the outside world may feel impossibly distant. Two, Black Dolphin Prison, Russia. In southern Russia stands a prison whose name sounds almost fictional, yet the men held inside include some of the country's most dangerous convicted criminals. Black Dolphin is known for a level of control that begins the moment a prisoner leaves his cell. Inmates serving extremely long sentences are closely monitored, and movement through the facility is heavily restricted. Prisoners may be escorted in ways intended to prevent them from memorizing the layout, while guards maintain constant supervision. The prison's reputation comes not from its size, but from who is kept there. Murderers, violent repeat offenders, and other high-risk inmates have made Black Dolphin one of Russia's most infamous penal institutions. Inside the cells, daily life follows rigid routines with little freedom and very limited contact with the outside world. The prison may have walls, doors, and corridors like any other facility, but for many inmates, those corridors may be the last landscape they ever know. 5. San Pedro Prison, La Paz, Bolivia. San Pedro Prison may be one of the strangest prisons on Earth because for years, parts of life inside operated more like a crowded neighborhood than a conventional correctional facility. Located in the center of La Paz, the prison became internationally famous for an internal economy in which prisoners could occupy different living spaces, depending on what they could afford. Shops, food stalls, informal businesses, and family visits created an environment unlike the tightly controlled corridors of a typical maximum security prison. But that apparent freedom came with another reality. Prisoners often had to survive within a social system shaped by money, status, and inmate-controlled rules. The walls kept everyone inside, yet much of daily life developed beyond direct traditional supervision. That is what makes San Pedro so fascinating. It challenges the normal idea of what a prison should look like. From the street, it is simply another guarded building. Inside, it has functioned almost like a separate city with its own hierarchy.
Could you ask him for that one?
7. Guantánamo Bay Detention Camp, Cuba. At the edge of southeastern Cuba, inside a United States naval base, sits one of the most controversial detention facilities in modern history. Guantánamo Bay became globally known after detainees captured during the post-9/11 War on Terror were transferred there beginning in 2002. Its location immediately gave it an unusual character, a highly controlled detention complex operating inside a military base, separated from much of the surrounding world. Security dominates everything. Restricted zones, fencing, guarded compounds, surveillance, and military procedures create layers of separation between detainees and the outside environment. But the real reason Guantánamo became famous is not simply physical security. It became the center of international debates over indefinite detention, interrogation practices, legal rights, and national security. From above, the coastline can appear almost beautiful. That contrast makes the place even more unsettling. Tropical water outside, controlled compounds inside, and detainees whose cases became part of one of the most disputed chapters of 21st century detention policy. Eight. La Modelo Prison, Bogotá, Colombia. In the heart of Bogotá stands a prison that became notorious not only for holding dangerous criminals, but for the violent power struggles that once unfolded inside its walls. La Modelo gained a dark reputation during periods when rival groups, guerrilla members, paramilitaries, and ordinary inmates were confined in the same overcrowded system. In some sections, control could become dangerously fragmented, turning entire cell blocks into tense territories shaped by alliances and fear. The prison's most disturbing history includes riots, killings, and confrontations that reveal just how quickly order could collapse when too many competing forces were trapped together. From outside, the concrete walls looked like those of many large urban prisons. Inside, however, every corridor once carried a different balance of power. That is what made La Modelo so feared. The greatest danger was not simply being locked away from society. It was being placed inside a world where the rules could change depending on which side of a corridor you entered. Rikers Island, New York City, USA. Just a short distance from one of the most famous skylines on Earth sits a jail complex with a completely different reputation. Rikers Island has long been associated with violence, overcrowding, gang activity, mental health crises, and difficult conditions for both detainees and staff. Many people held there are awaiting trial rather than serving long prison sentences, making the uncertainty of daily life an important part of the story. The island location adds another layer of separation. Bridges connect the complex to New York City, yet life inside can feel disconnected from the millions of people living only miles away. Different facilities on the island hold different populations, creating a vast detention system rather than a single traditional prison building. That contrast is what makes Rikers so visually powerful. On one side is New York, a symbol of movement and freedom. On the other is an island where thousands of lives can be reduced to locked doors, waiting and survival inside a deeply troubled system. Petak Island Prison, Russia. Surrounded by water in Russia's cold northwest, Petak Island feels less like a prison complex and more like a place deliberately removed from the rest of the world. The facility, often associated with the Volgodsky Petak prison, is located on an isolated island near the historic Kirillo-Belozersky Monastery region. Its geography creates a natural barrier before walls or guards are even considered. Prisoners serving extremely long sentences can spend years in tightly controlled cells with limited movement and restricted contact. During winter, the freezing landscape reinforces the sense of isolation, turning the surrounding water, ice, and distance into another layer of confinement. There is no bustling city pressed against these walls. There is cold, silence, and separation. That makes Petak Island different from overcrowded urban prisons. Its danger is psychological as much as physical. For someone locked inside, escape would require overcoming not only security systems, but an environment that seems designed by nature itself to keep the outside world far away. Tadmor Prison, Syria. In the Syrian desert, once stood a prison whose reputation became synonymous with terror. Tadmor Prison, near the ancient city of Palmyra, was used for decades to hold political prisoners, military detainees, and opponents of the Syrian government. Former inmates and human rights organizations described a system shaped by severe abuse, extreme punishment, and fear. The desert location intensified everything. Far from major population centers, prisoners were isolated not only by walls, but by vast stretches of empty land. Inside, harsh discipline and limited outside contact created an environment where prisoners could effectively disappear from public view. One of the darkest chapters in the prison's history was the 1980 massacre, when large numbers of inmates were killed following political violence elsewhere in the country. Tadmor was later destroyed during the Syrian conflict, but its name remained. Some prisons become famous because they are difficult to escape. Tadmor became infamous because, for many people sent there, simply surviving the experience was the greater challenge. Ciudad Barrios Prison, El Salvador. Before CECOT became the symbol of El Salvador's war on gangs, another prison showed the world just how deeply criminal organizations could influence life behind bars.
Shots fired! Officer down! I repeat!
Ciudad Barrios became especially famous for housing large numbers of MS-13 members. At different points in its history, entire sections were dominated by gang structures, allowing prisoners to maintain their own internal hierarchy and communication networks. The result was an unusual and dangerous balance. Guards controlled the perimeter, but life inside could be shaped heavily by the prisoners themselves. Tattoos, gang symbols, makeshift living spaces, and tightly organized groups turned the prison into a reflection of the violent street culture outside. That history is important because it helps explain why El Salvador later moved toward a radically different model of incarceration. CECOT was built around control from above. Ciudad Barrios represented the opposite problem. What happens when powerful criminal groups become deeply embedded inside the prison environment itself? In many ways, one prison helps explain the creation of the other. San Quentin State Prison, California, USA. Overlooking the waters of San Francisco Bay, San Quentin is one of the most recognizable prisons in the United States. But its scenic location hides a much darker history. Opened in 1852, it became California's oldest prison and later housed some of the state's most notorious offenders. For decades, San Quentin was closely associated with death row, maximum security confinement, violent inmates, and strict prison routines. Inside, aging cell blocks and narrow corridors create a heavy atmosphere far removed from the beautiful coastline outside. Generations of prisoners have passed through these walls, giving the facility an almost legendary reputation in American crime history. But San Quentin is more than an old prison. It has also become known for rehabilitation and education programs. That contrast makes it fascinating. A historic fortress of punishment slowly attempting to redefine what life behind bars can become. Diyarbakır Prison, Türkiye. Some prisons become infamous because of the criminals inside them. Diyarbakır Prison became infamous because of what prisoners said happened behind its walls.
Cold water.
Located in southeastern Turkey, the facility gained its darkest reputation after the 1980 military coup, when political detainees and Kurdish prisoners were held under extremely harsh conditions. Former inmates later described beatings, humiliation, torture, and severe psychological pressure. The prison became more than a detention center. For many, it turned into a symbol of political repression and fear. Its concrete walls concealed a world where daily routines could become forms of punishment, and where prisoners often had little control over even the smallest details of their lives. Decades later, the name Diyarbakır prison still carries enormous historical weight. What makes the place disturbing is not advanced security or extreme isolation. It is the memory of how a prison can become dangerous when authority itself becomes part of the punishment. Lurigancho Prison, Lima, Peru. On the outskirts of Lima stands a prison that became famous for something almost impossible to imagine: an enormous inmate population trying to build its own social order inside overcrowded walls. Lurigancho Prison has long struggled with congestion, limited resources, and complex relationships between prisoners. In different periods, inmates organized informal businesses, food services, workshops, religious groups, and internal communities simply to survive daily life. That creates an unusual contrast. The prison is heavily confined from the outside, yet inside, thousands of people may depend on systems created by the prisoners themselves. Space, protection, money, and personal connections can become essential parts of survival. The greatest threat is not always escape or armed violence. Sometimes it is simply being trapped in an environment where overcrowding changes every aspect of life. Lurigancho feels less like a conventional prison and more like a compressed city where freedom ends at the perimeter walls. Belmarsh Prison, London, United Kingdom. Only a short distance from central London sits a prison often associated with some of Britain's highest-risk inmates. Gem Prison Belmarsh opened in 1991 and developed a reputation as one of the United Kingdom's most secure correctional facilities. Terrorism suspects, organized criminals, violent offenders, and other high-profile prisoners have been held within its heavily controlled sections. Security begins long before anyone reaches a cell. Multiple barriers, surveillance systems, restricted movement, reinforced areas, and carefully managed routines separate prisoners from one another and from the world outside. Yet the location creates a strange contrast. London is nearby, filled with traffic, airports, businesses, and millions of people moving freely every day. Inside Belmarsh, movement can be reduced to a carefully controlled sequence of doors and corridors. It does not need a remote island or frozen wilderness to create isolation. Here, some of the strongest barriers exist only miles from one of the busiest cities on Earth. La Sabaneta Prison, Venezuela. For years, La Sabaneta became a symbol of what can happen when overcrowding, weapons, gangs, and weak institutional control collide inside one prison. Located in Maracaibo, Venezuela, the facility gained international notoriety for violent confrontations and dangerous living conditions. At certain points, the number of prisoners far exceeded the space originally designed for them. Inside, informal power structures could become as important as official prison rules. Weapons, rival groups, limited resources, and overcrowded cell blocks created an environment where conflict could erupt rapidly. One of the prison's darkest moments came during a deadly riot in the 1990s that killed large numbers of inmates. La Sabaneta was eventually closed, but its reputation survived. The prison became a warning about a different kind of danger, not an institution with too much control, but one where official control could become dangerously weak. When order disappears behind locked gates, the prison itself can become the battlefield. Committee Maximum Security Prison, Kenya. Outside Nairobi lies one of Kenya's best-known maximum security prisons, a place associated for decades with serious offenders, political history, and strict confinement. Committee Maximum Security Prison was originally established during the colonial era and later became one of the country's most important high-security facilities. Its population has included convicted murderers, violent criminals, and inmates serving extremely long sentences. High walls, guarded sections, controlled gates, and crowded cell blocks separate prisoners from the rapidly expanding city beyond. But conditions inside have also drawn attention over the years, particularly concerns surrounding overcrowding, sanitation, healthcare, and limited resources. For prisoners, daily life can become a repetitive cycle shaped by restricted movement and close supervision. Committee does not depend on dramatic architecture to appear intimidating. Its reputation comes from history, confinement, and the people sent there. Behind those walls exists a world almost invisible to the millions of people moving through Nairobi outside. Butyrka Prison, Moscow, Russia. In the middle of Moscow stands a prison whose history stretches back centuries, making it one of Russia's most famous places of confinement. Butyrka Prison has held common criminals, political prisoners, revolutionaries, and other detainees through dramatically different periods of Russian history. Its old walls have witnessed imperial rule, revolution, Soviet repression, and the modern era. Unlike isolated prisons hidden in deserts or forests, Butyrka sits inside a major capital city. That makes the contrast especially striking. Traffic, apartment buildings, and ordinary urban life exist beyond the perimeter, while inside are aging corridors, barred cells, heavy doors, and a long tradition of strict confinement. Overcrowding and difficult conditions have also contributed to its intimidating reputation over the years. But the most powerful element is history itself. At Butyrka, the danger does not come from one single generation of prisoners. It comes from centuries of human stories accumulated behind the same walls. El Rodeo Prison, Venezuela. El Rodeo became internationally known after violence inside the prison escalated so severely that security forces were eventually deployed to regain control. Located near Caracas, the complex held large numbers of inmates in conditions often associated with overcrowding, gangs, weapons, and powerful internal prisoner groups. During major disturbances, sections of the prison could become extremely difficult for authorities to control. The danger came from a frightening imbalance. The walls were designed to keep prisoners inside, but inside those same walls, armed groups could sometimes create their own territories and rules. When confrontations erupted, the prison could transform from a correctional facility into something closer to a fortified battleground. For inmates who were not part of powerful groups, survival could depend on alliances and access to protection. El Rodeo's reputation shows how quickly confinement can become more dangerous when official authority weakens. A prison does not need to be remote to feel lawless. Sometimes the most dangerous world begins after the gates close. Red Onion State Prison, Virginia, USA. Hidden among the mountains of southwestern Virginia is a prison designed for inmates considered too dangerous or disruptive for ordinary facilities. Red Onion State Prison opened as a supermax institution, with security built around restricted movement, close monitoring, and long periods of confinement. Inside high-security sections, prisoners can spend much of the day inside reinforced cells. Contact with other inmates may be limited, while meals, recreation, and movement are carefully controlled. The surrounding landscape makes the isolation even more noticeable. Forested mountains stretch beyond the prison, but for those inside, that open space is unreachable. Red Onion has also faced criticism over the psychological effects of prolonged isolation and the conditions experienced by prisoners held under restrictive housing. Its danger is therefore not defined by riots or massive inmate populations. Instead, it comes from the opposite extreme: silence, separation, and the slow passage of time inside a cell where almost every movement is controlled. Kerobokan Prison, Bali, Indonesia. Bali is known around the world for beaches, resorts, temples, and tropical landscapes. But behind the walls of Kerobokan Prison exists a far less glamorous side of the island. Located near some of Bali's busiest tourist areas, the prison has held Indonesian inmates alongside foreign nationals convicted of crimes including drug trafficking. Overcrowding has been one of its most persistent challenges. Cells designed for far fewer people have sometimes housed large numbers of prisoners, placing pressure on sanitation, sleeping space, healthcare, and daily routines. The contrast with the outside world is extraordinary. Only a short distance away, travelers relax beside pools and beaches. Inside Kerobokan, inmates live behind walls in a dense and tightly controlled environment. That contrast gives the prison its strongest documentary hook. Two completely different versions of Bali exist almost side by side. One built around freedom and escape, the other around confinement, where leaving is no longer a choice. 26. Vladimir Central Prison, Russia. Behind thick walls in the historic Russian city of Vladimir stands a prison that has held some of the country's most famous and politically significant inmates. Vladimir Central was established during the Russian Empire and continued operating through the Soviet period into modern times. Over generations, its cells have held criminals, political prisoners, spies, and people considered dangerous by different governments. The prison's architecture reflects its long history. Heavy doors, narrow corridors, barred windows, and tightly controlled spaces create an atmosphere that feels far removed from modern correctional design. Yet its real power comes from the names and stories connected to those cells. For some prisoners, confinement here lasted years. For others, the psychological weight came from not knowing when freedom might return. Vladimir Central is not the largest prison on this list, but few places carry such a long memory. Every corridor seems connected to another chapter of Russian history. '27. Bangu Prison Complex, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Beyond Rio de Janeiro's famous beaches and mountains lies a massive prison complex connected to a very different side of the city. The Bangu prison system has housed high-risk criminals, gang leaders, and inmates linked to powerful organized crime groups. In Brazil, prison gangs can extend their influence far beyond cell walls, making certain facilities important centers in larger criminal networks. That creates an unusual security problem. Authorities are not simply trying to prevent physical escape. They must also restrict communication, smuggling, and attempts by imprisoned leaders to influence events outside. Inside, high walls and controlled sections divide thousands of prisoners according to security needs and affiliations. The contrast with Rio could hardly be stronger. Tourists see ocean views, nightlife, and iconic landmarks. Behind Bangu's walls, daily life revolves around surveillance, hierarchy, and confinement. The city outside never stops moving, while inside, power can still travel even when people cannot. '28. Goulburn Correctional Centre, Australia. In rural New South Wales stands one of Australia's best-known high-security prisons, including a specialised section built for some of the country's most dangerous inmates. Gulburn Correctional Center has operated for more than a century, but its reputation became even stronger with the creation of the High Risk Management Correctional Center. This heavily controlled unit is designed for prisoners considered major security threats. Movement is restricted, surveillance is extensive, and contact can be carefully managed. Every transfer between areas is planned to reduce opportunities for violence or escape. The prison's quiet regional setting adds to the atmosphere. Beyond the walls are open roads and countryside. Inside, the environment is divided into secure zones where freedom can shrink to a few controlled spaces. Gulburn shows that a dangerous prison does not need overcrowded chaos. Sometimes, danger is managed through the opposite approach: extreme organization, separation, and constant observation. (29) Guldani Prison, Georgia. In Tbilisi, one prison became internationally notorious after disturbing footage revealed what could happen when abuse became hidden behind secure walls. Guldani Prison gained global attention in 2012 when videos showing prisoners being beaten and humiliated triggered outrage across Georgia. The scandal transformed the facility from an ordinary correctional institution into a national symbol of prison system abuse. Behind its concrete walls, inmates lived under strict routines, limited freedom, and constant dependence on guards for movement and basic needs. That imbalance of power became the most frightening part of the story. The danger at Guldani was not defined by escape attempts or heavily armed gangs. It came from the possibility that the people responsible for maintaining order could themselves become part of the threat. After the scandal, reforms were introduced across Georgia's prison system. But the name Guldani remains connected to one unforgettable lesson. The most dangerous prison is sometimes the one where nobody outside can see what is happening inside. (30) Arthur Road Jail, Mumbai, India. Surrounded by one of India's busiest cities, Arthur Road Jail hides an overcrowded world behind high walls and security gates. Officially known as Mumbai Central Prison, the facility has housed people accused or convicted in some of India's most high-profile criminal cases. Its urban location creates constant pressure. Space is limited. Inmate populations can become extremely dense, and daily routines must operate within a facility built in a city where every square foot is valuable. Inside, security separates different categories of prisoners, while guards manage movement through narrow corridors, cells, and controlled sections. Outside, Mumbai moves at extraordinary speed. Trains arrive, traffic flows, businesses open, and millions of people cross the city every day. Inside the jail, time moves differently. That contrast gives Arthur Road its strongest documentary image. One of the world's busiest cities, surrounding a place where movement can be reduced to a few locked rooms and guarded passageways. Hmm. (32) Penitentiary of New Mexico, USA. Some prisons become famous because of their security. The Penitentiary of New Mexico became infamous because of what happened when security completely collapsed. In February 1980, inmates took control of parts of the prison during one of the deadliest prison riots in United States history. For more than a day, the institution descended into chaos. Hostages were taken, fires spread, sections of the prison were destroyed, and extreme violence erupted between prisoners. By the time authorities regained control, dozens of inmates had been killed and many others were injured. The riot exposed serious problems involving overcrowding, poor conditions, tension, and failures inside the prison system. Today, the event remains the defining chapter of the facility's history. The disturbing lesson is simple. Walls, locked doors, and armed guards can create the appearance of complete control. But when that control breaks down inside a confined population, the prison can become more dangerous than the world it was built to protect society from. (33) La Victoria Prison, Venezuela. Near Caracas stands a prison whose history reflects many of the same pressures that have shaped Venezuela's most troubled correctional facilities. La Victoria Prison has been associated with overcrowding, armed inmates, gang influence, and periods when prisoners gained significant control over daily life inside. In such environments, official rules can become only one part of the system. Prisoners may depend on internal hierarchies for food, protection, sleeping space, and access to basic resources. Weapons and rival groups can turn ordinary disputes into dangerous confrontations. The walls keep the population contained, but they cannot automatically guarantee order. That is what makes prisons like La Victoria so difficult to manage. The greatest challenge is not simply stopping people from escaping. It is preventing a separate power structure from developing inside. From outside, the prison appears closed and controlled. Inside, however, authority can become divided between guards at the perimeter and powerful inmate groups operating beyond the gates.